Hello students, now let us try to understand the extensive properties. What is meaning of extensive properties, student? So it is the property of a substance that depends on the quantity, okay, that depend on the quantity or size of the matter present in the system. Okay, so extensive property is what that is the property of the substance. Property of the substance that is depending on the what student quantity or the size of the matter present in the system. Okay, that two point we have to keep in mind for the extensive property, student. That is the property of a substance that depends on the quantity and the size of the matter present in the system. That is what is known as extensive properties. What are the example of extensive properties, student? Mass. Mass will be greater if the matter is more, quantity is more. Volume. Volume will be more if the quantity is more. Internal energy will be more if the quantity is more. Enthalpy will be more if the quantity will be more. Entropy will be more if the quantity will be more. Heat capacity will be more if the quantity will be more. Gives energy will be more if the quantity will be more. Heat content will be more if the quantity will be more. Number of moles will be more if the quantity will be more. So these all the properties like that: mass, volume of the gas, internal energy, enthalpy, entropy, heat capacity, gives energy, heat content, and number of moles, these all are depending on the quantity and size of the matter. That is why they are all known as what? Extensive properties. So extensive properties are what, student? That is the property which is depending on the quantity or the size of the matter present in the system. That is what is known as the extensive property. Let us do some of the problem, student. This is from the Narayana book. So now if you solve out the proper problem, what is an extensive property in chemistry? An extensive property in physical is a physical quantity whose value is proportional to size of the system. It describes or to quantity of matter in the system. For example, mass of a sample is extensive property. It depends on the amount of the substance. So what is extensive properties according to this question? That is depending on the size or the amount of the matter. That is. Now, how volume is extensive properties? Let us try to understand how the volume is extensive property. The property that are independent of the mass or size of the system, or which does not depends on the amount of substance, are known as intensive property. Hence volume is extensive properties. Okay, let us, the property that are independent of the mass or size of the system, which does not depends on the amount of substance, are known as intensive. But volume is depending on what, student? Volume is proportional to amount of substance. So volume, that is what, if it is depending on amount of substance, that is quantity of substance, that is what it is, the extensive properties. Okay, so that is, don't get confused here, because here they have given the definition of intensive property, but here is what is the volume is what, depending on the amount or the mass of substance, greater the quantity, greater will be volume. So it is the depending on the external quantity. So that is what the extensive properties. Now let us move on the another point. What is the, is weight an extensive property? Yes, weight is, let us see, extensive properties vary with the amount of substance included: mass, weight, and volume. So mass, weight, and volume are what? Extensive properties. Why? Because they are depending on the amount of substance. Right, student? Now next point, let us, which is not an extensive properties. Which is not extensive property? An extensive properties is one which depends upon extent, mass of the system. Since see, student, refractive index is not dependent on the amount of substance, so it is not an extensive property. So that is when you are talking about the refractive index. Okay, student, refractive index. So refractive index is what, student? This is the intensive properties. Intensive properties. Okay, intensive property means, what is meaning of this? That is, it is the not depending on the amount of substance. Whatever the light getting a incident on the any matter, that is getting refracted. Okay, So refraction is being done, but it is not depending on how much matter is there. Even single particle is, a single particle is having the its own refractive index. So refractive index is intensive properties, not extensive properties. Next one, what is the problem? Is color and extensive properties? See student, color. So try to understand that is color is depending on the amount of substance or not. So let us resolve. Extensive properties such as mass, volume depends on the amount of matter being measured. Intensive properties such as density and color do not depends on the amount of substance present in it. So physical so it means color and density do not depending on the amount of substance. So if it is not depending on amount of substance, so it is what is student, this is the color is intensive property. Okay, that you have to keep in mind student, that is you have to think each and every time, that is it depending on the quantity of substance or not. If not, suppose depending means intensive property. Why volume is intensive properties? So why is volume a intensive properties? This question it is itself wrong student. Volume is extensive properties. It is so, it should be the extensive. It is so because depend on the mass. Any properties depending on the mass called extensive properties. So why volume is extensive properties? Because it's depending on the mass. Okay, so question is wrongly given, but explanation is right. Now again you see student extensive properties in the broader way from some other books. So what is the meaning? Some properties of the matter depend on the size of the sample, while some do not. An extensive property that depends on the amount of matter in a sample. The mass of an object is measured of the amount of matter that an object contains. A small sample of the certain type of matter will have a small mass, while larger sample will have the greater mass. Another extensive property is the volume. The volume of an object is measured of the space that occupied by a object. Now let us move another point. The figure below illustrates the extensive properties of volume. The picture and glass both contain milk. The picture hold approximately 2/4 and the glass will hold 8 uh, 8 part of milk. The same milk in each container. The only difference is the amount of the container contained in the glass. So that is what is, this is the volume become the extensive properties. Okay, what is an extensive properties of a system depends on the system size or the amount of matter in it. Okay, now what they are saying, if the value of property of a system is equal to the sum of the value of parts of the system, then such property is called extensive property. Volume, energy, mass, example of extensive properties. Okay student, see student, here is some difference are there. Difference between extensive and intensive properties. Extensive properties, dependent properties. Size changes, it can be computed, cannot be easily identified. Okay, so what are there? Length, mass, weight, volume are the extensive intensive properties. Independent properties, size does not change, it cannot be computed, it can be easily identified. Melting point, color, ductility, conductivity, pressure, boiling point, luster, freezing point, odor, density are the intensive properties. Here some diagrammatic I have represented student to understand the extensive. Boiling point, intensive properties. Color, intensive property. Temperature, intensive property. Luster, intensive property. Hardness, intensive properties. But extensive property, you see volume, mass, size, weight, length, these all are the extensive properties. Okay student, here also extensive properties depend on the amount, mass, volume. Intensive properties depend on the type of matter, hardness. Here the same is their intensive and extensive properties that you can understand. Okay, thank you so much for watching friends.